It has been over a month now, yet the anger I feel has not lessened in the slightest. The betrayal, the lies, and the overwhelming sense of foolishness still weigh heavily on me. I am 26 years old, and my ex-girlfriend, who is 27, and I had been together since high school. For the longest time, I thought our relationship was solid. We had built a life together, and I believed we shared a bond that could withstand anything. That belief was shattered when she confessed to cheating on me. What made it worse was that she admitted our 10-month-old baby boy, whom I had been raising and loving as my own, might not actually be mine. When she first told me, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. The overwhelming mix of anger, sadness, and confusion left me numb. I couldn't comprehend how someone I had loved and trusted for so many years could betray me like this. Eventually, after much emotional turmoil, I took a paternity test. The results confirmed what I had feared the most. I was not the father. I cannot even begin to describe the heartbreak that followed. It wasn't just a betrayal that hurt. It was a realization that the bond one thought I had with that child was based on a lie. I felt like a fool for not questioning things earlier, for blindly trusting someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. There was no saving the relationship after that. I told her in no uncertain terms that we were done. I packed my belongings and moved out of our apartment that same day. I didn't want to see her again, let alone have any further conversations. Right now, I'm staying with a close friend who has been incredibly supportive. I've also taken legal steps to have my name removed from the child's birth certificate. It's a painful process, but I know it's necessary for me to move forward and close this chapter of my life for good. As if all of this wasn't enough to deal with, the situation became even more complicated when my mother revealed something that shook me to my core. She confessed that she had known the baby wasn't mine from the very beginning. My ex had gone to her in tears after discovering she was pregnant, admitting everything. My mother chose to keep this information from me, believing it was for the best. She hoped the child would turn out to be mine and wanted to spare me the pain of knowing the truth too soon. When she told me this, I felt like I had been stabbed in the back by the one person I thought I could always rely on. Learning that my mother of all people had kept such a significant secret from me felt like an even deeper betrayal than what my ex had done. A part of me understood that she may have had good intentions, but the reality was that she allowed me to live a lie for almost a year. I had spent months bonding with a child that was never mine to begin with. I had changed diapers, stayed up during sleepless nights, and sacrificed so much of my time and energy believing I was doing what any father should. To know that my own mother had the power to prevent all of this, but chose not to, left me feeling resentful and deeply hurt. She apologized countless times, insisting that she had acted out of love and hope. She told me she didn't want to destroy the life I was building or take away the joy I seemed to find in fatherhood. But her excuses fell flat. In my eyes, she had prioritized preserving a lie over protecting her son from unimaginable heartbreak. I felt robbed of my agency, denied the chance to make an informed decision about my own life. I couldn't help but feel angry at the fact that she thought sparing my feelings temporarily was more important than preventing long-term damage. Surprisingly, my father and older brothers sided with me. They were equally upset with my mother's actions and expressed their disappointment in her. However, extended family members began urging me to let it go, insisting that my mother had only been trying to help. They felt I was being too harsh by refusing to forgive her. I wrestled with the conflicting emotions of love and betrayal, torn between the desire to move forward and the inability to trust her again. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to process everything. I broke a few things in anger and eventually decided to take a solo trip to clear my head. Being alone, away from the noise of family and friends, allowed me to sit with my thoughts. It was cathartic to vent, cry, and simply exist without judgment. I found solace in the support of strangers, people who listened without offering unsolicited advice. When I returned, I knew I had to confront my mother directly. We had a long, emotional conversation where I laid everything out. I told her how betrayed I felt, how disappointed I was that she had chosen to align herself with someone who had hurt me so deeply. I explained that her desire to maintain a false sense of family had led to irreparable damage in our relationship. I couldn't accept her justification that she wanted the child to grow up with a father, especially since that child was never mine. As much as I wanted to forgive her, I realized that I couldn't. I made it clear that while I appreciated everything she had done for me in the past, this betrayal was not something I could simply overlook. I told her I needed space, and for the foreseeable future, I didn't want her involved in my life. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I felt a sense of relief afterward. It was as if a weight had been lifted, even if the pain lingered. Since then, I have distanced myself from certain family members who continued to pressure me into reconciling with her. I even changed my phone number, sharing it only with my father and a few trusted individuals. The harassment and unsolicited advice stopped once I made it clear that I was serious about protecting my peace. Despite the lingering hurt, I'm beginning to feel like I'm finding solid ground again. It hasn't been easy, but I'm learning to trust myself and prioritize my well-being. There are still difficult days, but each one feels slightly better than the last. I know this journey will take time, but I'm ready to face it, one step at a time. I've been trying to come to terms with everything that has happened recently. At least I can say that my father has been a constant source of support through all of this. He stood by me when I was at my lowest, deeply depressed and overwhelmed by everything related to my ex-girlfriend. The situation with her has been nothing short of a nightmare, and it feels like I've been trapped in a storm with no clear way out. One of the most difficult parts of this ordeal has been dealing with the uncertainty surrounding the biological father of her child. From the very beginning, she refused to identify who the real father was, leaving me in the dark and forcing me to navigate an incredibly complex and emotionally draining situation. It felt like I was left with the weight of responsibilities that shouldn't have been mine to bear. Convincing her to help me through this process was a long and arduous battle. I remember constantly asking myself why it wasn't enough for her to hurt me emotionally and mentally. Why did she feel the need to drag things out even further? It seemed like she was fighting to keep me listed on the birth certificate despite knowing how much I wanted to sever ties and move on. I couldn't understand why she was so resistant to letting me go. Just a few days ago, after countless conversations and relentless persuasion, she finally revealed the truth. She admitted that the real father was someone we both knew, which, while not entirely surprising to me, was still difficult to hear. I had suspected for some time that her secrecy stemmed from the fact that the father was someone familiar to both of us. Even though I had prepared myself for that possibility, hearing it confirmed still hit me hard. The realization that there were people in my life capable of such betrayal is something I'm struggling to process. It's painful to think that while I was trying to piece things together, there were others who knew the truth and chose to remain silent. None of my family had any clue about the situation, but deep down, I had sensed something was off. Still, knowing doesn't make it easier to accept. The sting of betrayal lingers, and I'm left questioning who I can truly trust. I'm trying to absorb all of this as it unfolds. It's still fresh and raw, and each day feels like a new challenge in trying to come out of this stronger. Legally, the process of having my name removed from the birth certificate doesn't seem like it will be too difficult, provided she doesn't change her mind. However, knowing her unpredictable nature, I'm hesitant to believe that everything will go smoothly. I've learned not to take her word at face value, and part of me fears that she could decide to complicate things once again. All I want now is to be done with this chapter of my life. The thought of being responsible for someone else's child for the next 18 years is something I simply can't bear. I'm holding on to the hope that she follows through with her promise and allows me to walk away without further obstacles. Ending this ordeal would give me the closure I've been longing for, and I desperately need to put this all behind me. I'm sorry that I don't have better news to share, and I appreciate anyone who takes the time to understand what I'm going through. If nothing else, This experience has taught me the value of recognizing toxic people and knowing when to cut them out of my life. For the sake of clarity, I already have a lawyer actively working on the legal aspects of this process. I'm doing everything I can to ensure that my name is removed from the birth certificate as soon as possible. The sooner this is resolved, the sooner I can begin to heal and move forward. On top of everything else, something devastating came to light last night. I discovered that my wife, the person I trusted and built a life with, has been cheating on me. This is something I haven't been able to share with anyone yet. After 15 years of marriage, this revelation feels like a crushing blow. Although we had grown distant over the years, we still presented ourselves as a happy family. We have a 4-year-old son, and we always prided ourselves on being great parents, even if our relationship as a couple wasn't as strong as it once was. For a while, I've been grappling with feelings of depression, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Recently, I began to notice subtle changes in my wife's behavior. She seemed distracted, emotionally distant, and less invested in our relationship. At first, I brushed these feelings aside, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. I didn't want to face the possibility that she might be seeing someone else. However, as time went on, the signs became harder to ignore. I would catch her making excuses to stay out late, guarding her phone more closely, and pulling away from any meaningful conversations. Even though part of me knew what was happening, I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch that we could overcome. I didn't want to believe that the woman I had loved for so long could betray me in this way. The truth finally came out, and it hit me harder than I expected. I feel like the foundation of my life has been shaken, and I'm left wondering how we reached this point. We have a child together, and the thought of our family being torn apart is something I'm struggling to come to terms with. Despite everything, I know that I have to remain strong for my son. He deserves stability and love, no matter what happens between his mother and me. This past year has been filled with more heartache and betrayal than I ever thought possible. But I'm holding on to the hope that I can emerge from all of this stronger and wiser. I may not have all the answers right now, but I'm determined to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Yesterday evening, I went out with some old high school friends for a small get-together. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a casual night, catching up with people I hadn't seen in years. We laughed, reminisced, and before I knew it, the night had stretched longer than I anticipated. I returned home around midnight, quietly unlocking the door to avoid waking anyone. As I stepped inside, the house was dimly lit, and everything seemed calm and peaceful. The first thing I noticed was my wife preparing for bed. She was in our room, brushing her hair in front of the mirror. There was a softness to the scene that felt oddly comforting. Instinctively, I glanced at the baby monitor that sat on the table near the door. I do this almost every time I walk into the house, even if it's just out of habit. It's become second nature to check on our son, even though he's usually sound asleep by the time I get home. The monitor showed him resting quietly in his crib, and I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. A few moments later, I walked into our bedroom to change out of my clothes from the night out. My wife had already climbed into bed by then, facing away from me, her breathing steady. She appeared to be asleep. I didn't think much of it at the time, other than a fleeting sense of appreciation for the normalcy of the moment. I approached our son's crib, kissed his forehead gently, and whispered goodnight. There's a certain peace I feel every time I do this. A fatherly instinct, I suppose. As I turned to leave the room and head downstairs, something caught my eye. I saw the faint glow of my wife's phone screen illuminating the darkness. Her hands moved quickly over the screen as she typed, a slight crease of concentration visible on her brow even in the low light. At first, I brushed it off. It's not unusual for her to scroll through her phone before falling asleep, but something about the way she was typing almost furtively gave me pause. A small knot formed in my stomach. I turned and walked toward the baby monitor again, this time quietly, almost on instinct. I adjusted the camera angle slightly, just enough to capture her movements more clearly. I don't know why I did it, Maybe deep down, I already suspected something wasn't right. Or maybe I'm just overly cautious. Either way, I returned downstairs but couldn't shake the feeling. Later that night, when I was certain she had fallen asleep, I found myself reaching for her phone. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, and even as I unlocked it, I hesitated. But curiosity, mixed with dread, propelled me forward. The messages I found were undeniable. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled. Conversations between her and another man filled the screen. The words they exchanged felt like knives being driven into my chest. There was an intimacy in their words, a familiarity that shattered any illusions I had about our relationship. They talked about how they couldn't resist each other, how they wanted to be together. I read each line over and over, hoping I had misinterpreted, but the meaning was clear. I felt numb. I had always believed that after our child was born, her libido had naturally decreased. I attributed the lack of intimacy to the strains of parenting, the exhaustion that comes with raising a child. I even felt guilty at times for wishing we could be closer again. But as I stood there in the dark, her phone still clutched in my hand, I realized the truth had been hidden in plain sight. She wasn't indifferent to intimacy. She had simply chosen to share it with someone else. The next day at work, I could hardly focus. My thoughts drifted constantly, circling back to what I had read. At one point during the day, I overheard her on the phone. Her voice was soft, and she laughed in that way she used to with me, back when we were younger and happier. I listened closely, and my heart sank as she spoke to the man from the messages. I felt betrayed, yet oddly calm. I wasn't angry, not in the way I expected to be. I was just deeply hurt, as if I had been hollowed out from the inside. That evening, I made a decision. I found the man's number through the messages and called him directly. My voice was steady, but the tension behind it was unmistakable. I told him to come to my neighborhood. I wanted to confront him face to face. I knew who he was. His wife worked at the same company as me. They had a 2-year-old child. When he arrived, I was ready for a fight. I wanted to make him feel the same pain I felt, to ruin his life the way he had intruded into mine. But when he walked up to me, trembling and apologetic, all the rage I thought I had felt dissolved. There was no satisfaction in seeing him vulnerable. In that moment, I realized my wife had initiated this, not him. He was just another symptom of a deeper issue between us. I didn't strike him. Instead, I told him to leave and never come near me or my family again. As he walked away, I felt exhausted, like the weight of the entire situation had finally crushed me. My wife tried to explain, to insist it was a one-time mistake. But I couldn't accept that. I'd seen too much, read too much. Now, I find myself trapped in this limbo, unable to confide in anyone. I want to keep my family intact for the sake of my son. He deserves a stable home, a complete family. Some days I feel strong enough to move forward, but other days I'm barely holding on. Even now, as I sit watching her put our son to bed, I feel a sharp pain in my chest that refuses to subside. Writing this feels like the only outlet I have, sharing with strangers what I can't bring myself to say out loud.